welcome back to Hear Me Out. My name is Oxymoron, and I am your host. I hope you're not tired of hearing that. But yes, this is the Hear Me Out podcast, where we talk about everything concerning building better relationships, mental health, healing from trauma. We talk about finding purpose and so many other things where I bring on amazing guests. So welcome if this is your first time. I hope you stick around. I hope you enjoy. There's a lot of episodes here, so don't be shy. Go through the playlist on YouTube. If you're listening to this on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, Google, wherever you're listening to this, make sure leave a little comment, subscribe, follow. What else can you do? Like, review, like honest reviews. Honestly, I'm not gonna take anything to offense. I love to hear and know your guys' feedback and how you're experiencing and enjoying things. So yeah, and if you're coming and returning, your family, welcome back. Welcome to the best place to be at this very moment in time. So yeah, thank you for joining me. So today I want to talk about anxiety. And I'm kind of surprised that I actually have not spoken on this before, considering it's something that I mention so much in just my regular conversations and something that I've dealt with substantially in my life in so many different eras of me. And, just also like in school, just learning about anxiety, like, I feel like it's something that is so pervasive in this generation. We are just an anxious generation, a very anxious generation. Let me not even claim that, but it's just so much anxiety in this generation that I feel like it's really important to address it. And just to have a conversation about what it looks like, what it is. I kind of want to bring in some of the formal knowledge, let me say, on anxiety and what that actually looks like, how it actually happens and manifests. And then I want to talk about the practical application of certain principles, the spiritual aspect of anxiety, and the practical application of spiritual principles, because these are all things that have helped me, that are still helping me, and that I use to work through anxious thoughts, anxious feelings and experiences and behaviors. So with all my rambling, let's kind of get into it. So from a physiological or biological point of view, anxiety kind of happens in two ways. So obviously in our nervous system, we have the amygdala, which is kind of the focal point of dealing with anxiety. And there's also the frontal cortex, which is another centerpiece of dealing with anxiety, or how we experience anxiety. So pretty much what happens, like, you can experience anxiety in two ways physiologically. And what that kind of looks like is that with the amygdala, you can have a stimulus in your external environment, right? So the stimulus in your external environment will be communicated to, many systems in your body through the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus will receive that stimulus, that notification, and the hypothalamus will send that off to the amygdala. And the amygdala kind of has one main response. All it does is like, it reads a lot of things as danger, as stress, as pressure, as like a warning. And so it can send off these negative signals and these wrong interpretations of certain stimuli or certain experiences in our environment. And so when the amygdala goes, it sends this notice now to our sympathetic nervous system. And our sympathetic nervous system now causes a release of stress hormones, because it's like, okay, means we're in a dangerous situation. Things to prepare ourselves to react, to respond. So when the sympathetic nervous system releases these stress hormones, now what these stress hormones do is and these stress hormones are, epinephrine, norepinephrine, they create this response this physiological change in our body. And what that can look like, that can be, sweaty palms, that could be an increased heart rate, increased blood flow. You pretty much are ready to fight, flight, or freeze. And so then the actual behavioral change that comes about is that fight, flight, or freeze, because now your body's filled with adrenaline, and so you're just like, okay, am I gonna fight the stimuli? Am I gonna, run away? Am I just gonna freeze because I don't know what to do? So that's what anxiety looks like. That's what you see on the outside. What we call anxiety, that's kind of the process of it, is your amygdala receiving a signal and receiving something and then interpreting it as as danger, as something that is harmful, as like a predator, pretty much. And so that's one way that we kind of experience anxiety. And then another way is less physiological, more cognitive. And I feel like this is what a lot of people in our generation, this is where the anxiety that I, dealt with and fought a lot with was really in the mind and my cognitions. And what that looks like is, the same scenario. You have a stimulus, you have an event, something happens on the external. And then your prefrontal cortex, which helps you with, imagination, thoughts, creativity, all these great things. What it does is it takes and interprets those things in multiple different ways. And, it creates rumination of exaggerated situations it opens your imagination to thinking of like 100 things that could go wrong in that scenario, or 100 things that are frightening and anxiety inducing. And then because of, that thought process that is now building in your mind, building your cognitions, that's what builds and that's what creates that anxiety and those anxious behaviors, where now you are limited and now you can't function properly. And so to kind of give you like a breakdown of what these things could look like, you could use the example of like public speaking, because a lot of people don't like to public speak. Don't like to speak publicly. A lot of people don't like to speak publicly. So you can use that as an example, right? So imagine you experience a certain stimuli. So now if you're at an event and somebody calls on you, say, hey, Isabel, can you come up and, give a short presentation to this crowd of 300 people? So immediately you have that sensory information, sends it to your hypothalamus that I have to get up. This is not a good situation. What's going on right now is bad. Your amygdala goes, uh-oh, or your prefrontal or your frontal cortex goes like, this is not a good situation. And so on the amygdala side, you get those stress hormones that are released to get your body ready to, okay, am I going to perform? Am I going to show up, rise up to the occasion? Am I going to run away, or am I just going to freeze? And so in that time, that's when a lot of people say like they get sweaty palms, or, they can't breathe properly. They're like hyperventilating. That's usually when the anxiety is going through that pathway of the amygdala. When it's somebody that, if they're in that scenario and, they're called up to speak publicly, but then they might not experience those physiological symptoms, but all is in their mind is like, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? What am I going to do? Who's in the crowd? Like, oh my gosh, like, are people going to laugh at me? I'm going to say something like they're going to think I'm so stupid. All these thoughts are flooding your brain, and you're just building cognitions, and you're just associating, you're organizing all this information and interpreting everything negatively, pretty much. And like all you have is these maladaptive thought patterns because of this, sensory information that you perceived and interpreted as harmful or negative or threatening to you. And so now your behavior can either be, some people freeze, they're up there stuttering, they run away, like, so many things that can happen. And I think that's what usually happens. People often get stuck in that cognitive space of anxiety and of not being able to analyze their situation properly, or over analyzing. I know that's a big thing of, a lot of this generation says that they're overthinkers, and they don't know how to, make decisions or act in certain situations. They can't, work under pressure and things like that. a lot of it is that prefrontal, that frontal cortex area of anxiety and dealing with these things. And for both ways, I found that, research wise shows you that there are different approaches to treating this type of anxiety. And when people don't really understand what they're dealing with, that's when they can't treat it properly. They can't address it properly because they don't really know, okay, what exactly am I experiencing and what approach do I need to take? Because if what you're experiencing is less, you're not thinking, your mind is not active right now, it's more in your body, it's more of what you're experiencing physically, then changing the way that you think is not going to help you. But if it's, you're not feeling anything physically, but you're just stuck in your thoughts, you can't escape your mind, then it's very heavy on changing the way that you think and, taking control of your mind and having that ability to identify these maladaptive thoughts, to reject them and to change them in certain ways. And so, when people kind of try and apply, try breathing techniques, try physical activity to like calm down, it's just like, those are great when it's on the physiological side, when it's on, when it's, the pathway of the amygdala and you're experiencing those physiological symptoms. When it's more cognitive, breathing techniques, I'm so sorry, are not going to help you. There's certain things that just will not help you. Meditation when you're just, quiet is not going to help you. Making your body still, getting your body to stillness, that's not what's necessarily going to help you. I'm not saying it's impossible, but that's not necessarily what you would need at that time. And for the cognitive side, like what I've learned is that a lot of people, and it's so funny because psychology teaches us cognitive restructuring. And then when you now look at it, in scripture, it's like, it's been there all along. It's been there. It's been outlined there. But pretty much dealing with anxiety from a clinical perspective, it's applying cognitive restructuring through CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And what that looks like is understanding that, okay, if what I'm struggling with here is my thought patterns, which means my cognitions, it means that I need to restructure the way I think. And the reason that the way you think is a problem is because many people can experience the same sensory information. We can experience the same stimuli. We can experience the same thing, even, having similar experiences, we can all experience the same thing, right? So if three people were in that same scenario, the reason that we don't all have the exact same experience, exact same outcome, exact same reaction is because of our cognitions. And so what that means is that our cognitions help us to organize and interpret information. So in our cognitions, in our minds, we have things called schemas. And what schemas are is that they pretty much are like frameworks that we use to organize information. So you could imagine it as like, I think in elementary, we used to do those like brainstorming clouds, something like that. So schemas are what you use to organize information in order to now interpret new information and interpret your world, right? So if I was to say something like horse, when I say the word horse, what comes to mind? And there's certain words that are going to come to mind because of the schema that you built around a horse. And there's certain associations that come when you think of a horse. When I say horse, you could think of barn, you could think of hair, you could think of running, you could think of field, you could think of carrots, you can think of hay. All these things are going to kind of come. When I say horse, you're not going to think of motorcycle, most likely, right? Because your mind has learned to not associate motorcycle with horse. Your mind has learned to associate carrot with horse or hay with horse. And so that's how our cognitions work with anxiety, is that our mind has learned to associate certain things with certain thoughts. And so, the example of public speaking, you've learned to associate standing on a stage with, being exposed or being vulnerable, or, people staring at you as, being under pressure. And so that being under pressure brings feelings of anxiety. And so in your thought patterns and your schemas towards these certain stimuli, because generally, all things being equal, they're not threatening. public speaking, you have nothing to be fearful of in that situation. It has no harm to you. There's no threats there. Something like riding a bike, or, let me not say dog, because obviously they're still animals, but relatively, there's like a lot of these things are what we should not be fearing, but we fear them because of the associations that have been linked to them and what we continue to build. Sometimes, and this could be spiritual or, just a matter of association, us ourselves never actually experience anything negative to have those associations or to build those schemas, but oftentimes that we were told something, that we saw something, that we heard stories of, people being attacked by dogs, or we seen somewhere or heard something. And like, that's when you start to believe and build these organizations in your mind of this information. And so until you learn to restructure and address and now cancel out, or challenge those negative thoughts and challenge those ways of thinking, you won't actually be able to deal with that anxiety, because a lot of it is just worrying and just running in your mind, and a lot of thoughts of what if, or it could be this, it could be that, and just being very anxious. And like, that was a big thing for me. I'd say somewhere in my like adolescence, around somewhere in junior high and like a lot of high school, I think like all of high school, I dealt with bad anxiety, terrible, like crippling anxiety, to the point where I used to have a stack of rubber bands on my I used to have a stack of rubber bands on my wrist, that when I was feeling anxious, and for me, it wasn't so much physiological. Sometimes I would have like increased heart rate, but it was more so like, because I was so in my head and like I was getting so overwhelmed, like then it would turn physiological almost. So I would just have this, stack of rubber bands that I would just pull on to kind of, I don't even know what I really wanted it to do, honestly. I feel like it was to maybe so I could feel something else, like feel some other sort of pain, to pull me out of my mind and to pull me like back into that situation and back into reality. And it's so crippling, because really at the core, at the the root of anxiety, what it is just fear. It's fear of the situation, fear of the unknown, fear of pain, fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of failure, a very big one, fear of people, just a lot of fear. At the root of anxiety is fear. And, fear is really, really, really a spiritual thing, because it's really hard to explain, like, why you can just interpret, except you experience something, or you are directly told that this event or this interaction or this sensory information leads to this that is harmful. There's certain things that we should not be fearful of. So fear is very, very spiritual, right? In the sense that it's irrational. It doesn't make sense. And what I've learned is that the aim of fear through anxiety is to paralyze us, right? It's to paralyze you so that you can't move forward, and so that you can't do what you would naturally be able to do. You can't function how you would naturally be able to function, right? And anxiety, it's very deceptive. And fear is very, very deceptive, because it'll hide itself in different things, and it'll mask itself as so many things. And one thing that I learned recently, funny enough, that anxiety masks itself as, is perfectionism. And let me just say this now, that I've entirely dropped the idea of perfectionism and being a perfectionist, because it's not real. Like, when have I ever done something perfectly well? Like, I've done things excellently well. I've done things really well, like I've done my job excellent, right? But it's never been perfect. It's kind of like You know how in those really nice houses, you can have the butler's kitchen and then you have like the main kitchen. So when you have people over and you're hosting, and then you have the full spread out, you have people for dinner, da 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 da. Everything looks nice and glamorous and put together, well organized, beautiful, you know. But in the butler's kitchen is where everything is just a tornado, and that's what I was always doing. So in the front, everything presents well, everything is beautiful, it's organized, it's laid out, it looks perfect. But in the back to get there was just chaotic. And the thing is, that's normal. That's what it's supposed to be. Like, that's, you're supposed to put in the work to get that beautiful result. The work that you put in is not going to look beautiful, but the result is. And in my head, I wanted both things to be perfect, but just like, that's not going to happen. That's not possible. On my own works, I can't achieve perfection. And so what perfectionism was doing was just inducing anxiety, because it's something that I can never achieve, but it convinced me that this is something that I still should be striving for, just to paralyze me, just to limit me. Because it's like, it's like a child wanting to fly to the moon, not having, first of all, being a child, second of all, not having no money, not having no supplies, not being an astrophysicist, not being anything, and wanting to fly to the moon. You're already set up for failure, and that's what the idea of perfectionism was doing, was setting me up for failure, knowing that I can never achieve that, but all the while just inducing anxiety, trying to achieve that, and then striving for these things. And so I've just decided that I've fully abandoned the idea of anything ever being perfect. And it's very releasing, because it allows you to move forward with things no matter how they're looking or no matter how they will turn out. It allows you to just do things and to be consistent and to be dedicated to what you're doing, but not so attached to the perfect outcome that you are afraid to move forward or afraid to take a step. And that's what perfectionism was doing. Every step needs to be perfect, but every step cannot be perfect as long as it's just me walking. If Jesus was walking by my side, then that's a different story. But if it's just me, it's not, I can't expect that. And so I would hesitate to take a step because I wasn't sure if it was going to be perfect. I would hesitate to move. I would hesitate to make a decision. Being decisive was something that was very, 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 very difficult as a perfectionist, because you're so analytical and you want to analyze everything and make sure that, A plus B must equal C, and then you must, add D, subtract E. Everything has to be so well thought out. With me, just my brain like this, just my, I'm great by the grace of God, but still, it was just a big setup for failure, and just, a big door open for anxiety to come in at any time. And so I've really, if you ever hear me say the words perfectionist as a character trait again, just ask me to clip my mouth, please and thank you. And what I've also realized, in that on top of paralyzing, what it does is just disillusion you, as I've said, right? It just makes you think that you can achieve something that you really can't, not because you are not capable, but just because the steps to get there are just not in your grasp. And that's just the reality. It'll make you put yourself in a losing situation, pretty much. The idea of perfectionism, and then at the root of it, you won't be able to actually move forward, because deep down, you know that what you're aiming for is not something you should be aiming for, or not something that is achievable given these situations. And so fear will be there. Fear and anxiety will be there. And so you're never actually capable of moving forward. And that rumination, there was something that I read in a very amazing book that really, really set me free from that process of rumination and of trying to be perfect, and the idea of perfectionism. It's a book called An Iron Will. And, it's a pretty classical, I don't know if classical is a word. It's a pretty classic book. It's pretty old. is what I'm trying to say. But it has a lot of gems. Something that was highlighted in this book for me was so a few things actually. So one thing the author said, when I don't know whether to fight or not, I always fight. And I know it doesn't sound like, the most sound advice, like, okay, you don't know whether to fight or not, you always fight, like, why fight? And the essence of that is not necessarily, what I draw from that is not necessarily the choice to fight, but just the choice in itself. The choice was to take action, was to move. And that was something that was very, very big for me, because if it was left to me, if I was not sure, if I was not confident in my decision, if I was not confident in the circumstances or what it's looking like or the odds of things being perfect, then I just was not going to move. I was not going to do anything, because I would rather sit on the sidelines. Old me would rather sit on the sidelines and would rather not take the chance than take the chance and lose. And then you end up, never taking any chances. And I think it was Kobe Bryant that said, maybe Kobe Bryant, some great athlete said, you lose 99% of the shots that you don't take, or you miss 99% of the shots that you don't take. Something like that. Maybe Kobe Bryant, maybe it was Wayne Gretzky, somebody great. And that's what it really spoke to me. Like, when I don't know whether to fight or not, I always fight. Meaning I always make the choice to move when I'm in analysis paralysis, pretty much. And that's what rumination does to you. That's what anxiety wants to do to you. When you're ruminating in your mind and you can't make a decision, you think that you're being analytical. You think you are weighing the odds. You think you're being wise or being strategic, but you're not. You're delaying time. You're delaying your passion. All the time that you take to analyze, to ruminate, to think, the intensity that you could have been moving at is decreasing. The power that you could have been, moving at to make those decisions, to have an impact, is increasing. The faith that you even had in yourself, that you would have in your decision, is did I say increasing? Is decreasing. Like, all of those things are decreasing, and that's what anxiety wants to do to you. It wants to limit your impact and limit your effectiveness in its ability to stifle you and to almost neutralize you in that way, and by keeping you in a cycle of rumination. There's a lot of gems in this book, honestly. Like, if I could, I would just sit here and just, quite frankly, read this book to you. Like, it sounds very old, but it was just so many. It just feels like I'm reading the book of Proverbs, pretty much. But there was something that he said in here that I really wanted to read. So this quote says, "I don't do more but less than other people. They do all their work 3 times over. Once in anticipation, once in actuality, once in rumination. I do mine in actuality alone, doing it once instead of 3 times." And this was just like, yeah. And I feel like this is the same. This applies to like many things. This could even apply to like dealing with offense, or, building up offense, actually, because it's like, you experience the painful situation once. When you ruminate on it, you experience it again. The more you think about it, it's like you're just experiencing that same thing again. It's like you're reliving the trauma, you're reliving the experience. And that's what rumination does. That's what anxiety does. It makes you have to deal with the situation more times than you should. He said, I don't do more. Like, I'm going to do less. And that's the problem. Your anxiety and rumination will make you think that, oh, I'm going to do less if and planning is great. Like, I love planning. I encourage planning. You make sure that you, prepare well before you actually go into whatever you're doing. But when you are stuck on planning and rumination, you end up doing more, because you have to do it so many times over and so much energy is taken from you. But he said, people who ruminate or people who are stuck in this analysis paralysis, they do all their work 3 times. In anticipation, you're thinking what it's going to be like, da 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 da, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And then when you actually do it, and then when you do it again in rumination, because you can't get past what you did, oh my gosh, there was this and there was that and da 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 da. And it's just like you're reliving and keeping yourself in a cycle when you could just do it and leave it. Do it with impact, do it with faith, do it with full assurance, and leave it at that. There's something that my pastor said. There's like a whole sermon series that he ministered. I think like about a year ago this time. I can, I will, I must, and that really broke a lot of analysis paralysis of just I can do something. I know I can. Like I know I have the capabilities. Okay, I will do something. I'm saying that, okay, I'm going to get to it. Like I'm kind of, committing to the idea of it. And I must, like, no matter what, I'm determination. And that determination is what will really break a lot of anxiety for a lot of people, because a lot of times it's not necessarily tied to just like the emotional experiences. It's really the mental cognitions and just going on. It's less of what you actually have to deal with on like a personal and emotional level. I find in this generation, a lot of it starts from having a bad relationship with our thought patterns and, with our thought life, and not actually having control over that. And so now when it leaks into the emotional side, that's when it almost seems like it's bigger than us. But when we have more control and when we develop that strength in our thought patterns and our thought life, that's when we're able to now feel successful and feel more confident and able to move forward ultimately. And so there are quite a few things that the Bible has to say about this that in my life have also helped and shaped me. And I think I feel like this is pretty much cognitive restructuring if you really wanted to talk about cognitive restructuring. Don't cite me on this, but cite me on this. Philippians 4:6-9. I'll just read that briefly. And it really speaks heavily on the way that we think and why we should not be anxious. So it says, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. So clearly, God is telling us that we should not be anxious. And you would wonder, okay, if I should not be anxious, why are there so many things to be anxious for? Why is this generation so anxious? And then, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. That's to show us that the things that we are typically anxious for are not things that we should be leaving in our control. Anxiety comes from a lack of control, a lack of certainty, of not knowing how things are going to end up. But how can we know when it's us leading the ship? But when we put it in the hands of God through prayer and supplication and thanksgiving, we can be assured of the end result. Why? Because we know that God is good. We know that God is faithful. We know that the plans that he has for us are good, right? And it's just like when I start to apply this, that if I'm feeling anxiety, it means that whatever I'm feeling anxious towards is because it's something that is still in my hands that I need to now put in the hands of God, that I need to put in the hands of the Lord, because what he has for me and what he hopes for me and what he plans for me is to have peace, that I would have peace, and that the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, because it's peace that should not make sense. It's peace that I did not have to strive for, but I can experience freely, will help to guard my heart from future anxiety and from future fears in my mind, that I will not be ruminating, that I will not be overthinking, that I will not be overwhelmed. So every time that I'm realizing that I'm overthinking of things, I'm trying to strategize and re-strategize and re-strategize, that is because I have things that in my hand that I need to put in the hands of God. And that's what it means by prayer and supplication. I'm going to God that, Lord, I need you to step into this situation because it has taken over me and I don't know where to go. I've counted plan A, plan B, plan C, and it still doesn't make sense. And at that point, that's when you need to release it to God. Yes, we are capable. Yes, he has empowered us. Yes, he has given us grace. But there's limits ultimately as we are human. And it continues going on in the verses. It says, finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. The things which you learned and received and heard and you saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. And so if we now take it back to cognitive restructuring, that's what it is. Cognitive restructuring is, okay, now we're identifying these maladaptive thoughts that we have, these thought patterns. We're identifying these things that are negative, the core beliefs that you have about yourself, that you have about certain situations, that you have about certain outcomes. We're identifying them. What are these core beliefs? These things that are not of good report, the things that are there's not any virtue in them, the things that are not praiseworthy, that you believe and that you hold as core beliefs. What are they? And we're challenging them. So by challenging them means that you're identifying them and you're restructuring your brain to say that, no, actually, take this other path, look in this other perspective. This is what it is, not this. You're shifting your perspective, shifting your mind, and seeing what you would typically see as a terrible situation, as failure, as as not something that's not worthy, something that's not successful. You would see the value, you would see the opportunity, you would see the fruit in that. And so that's what it's saying, that in the scripture, that whatever things are true, we often believe in the things that are false because it almost seems like it's more powerful or something like that. But whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, are pure. These are things that we meditate on. Meditate on means we are forcefully choosing to focus on these things. Meditating means forcefully choosing to focus on these things. I'm deciding to shift my mind from the thoughts that tell me that I have no value, from the thoughts that tell me that I am not going to make an impact, the thoughts that tell me that I am not important, that I am not loved. I'm forcefully choosing to shift my mind from that to the thoughts that tell me that I am valued, that I am respected, that I am loved, that I honor people. I'm forcefully choosing to focus and believe on those things. And that's how we counteract. And that's you call it the simplified version of cognitive restructuring, right? And it goes on really much to tell us that what we meditate on, what we think about matters. What we think about matters, what we think about matters, like what we put in our minds matters, And what it also goes on to tell us is that knowing that we can go to God, right? The Bible says, cast your cares because he cares for you. Knowing that we can go to God in that prayer and supplication, knowing that we don't have to carry these things that we are burdening ourselves with this anxiety, and knowing that God always knows when we're in need. He always knows, he knows when we're in need because he knows us. He knows our needs more than us. He knows us more than us. So that's just a done and done. He knows us, but he's not forceful. He's never going to force your hand. He's never going to force you to come to him, right? And even in the previous verse, in Philippians, it talks about how God resists the pride but gives grace to the humble. So he knows that, okay, I'm not going to step into the situation if you are not letting me in. I'm not going to be a God to somebody who does not want me to. But if you are humble and you're ready, then he gives grace, which is help. He gives help for you to be able to carry that burden. He gives help for you to be able to resist that anxiety, for you to be able to, have a peaceful mind. He gives help for those things, right? And you can see that throughout the scriptures, God's word is just full of promises. It's full of promises that our suffering will not last forever, and that these burdens that we're carrying, when we bring them to him, that he has so much more for us. You can even go to Isaiah 61 verse 3, that tells us how he gives us beauty for our ashes. And that was one of my favorite scriptures growing up. I never understood it, but I loved it. I'm just like, that's a nice thing for him to do. Wow. Like, who would trade something beautiful for ashes? Like, ashes means it's already done, Like, there's nothing, but obviously God can do many things with ashes. He made us from the dust of the earth. So, but Isaiah 61:3 says, to console those who mourn in Zion, to give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they may be called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. The garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. Anxiety brings on a sense of heaviness in our minds where you just feel clouded. There's so many thoughts that you're battling with daily. There's so many thoughts that you would just wish to turn off your mind, right? And when we bring these to God, that's what he does. And my pastor told us, he really drilled this message and has made me look at, the things that I struggle with or challenges completely different. I no longer mourn when I have challenges because all I think is, oh, well, let me pile up my ashes. The more ashes, the more beauty. The more things that I have to bring to God, the more that he would return to me as glorious, that he would return to me as beautiful. Every time I bring it to him, not when I just gather and keep it in my pockets, then I'm just have ashes in my pockets, right? But when I bring these anxious thoughts, when I bring these things that are weighing down on my mind, when I bring these things and I say, hey, this is too much for me to carry. I can't carry this. You take this. And I leave it there. I genuinely leave it there. Forget about it. It's not occurring. I focus on whatever else he sent me to do, whatever else he's called me to do, right? That's when I can have confidence that in any situation, I know the outcome because I know that I have brought this to God and he is capable of making beauty from my ashes. And on my last point of kind of biblical principles, the one that really drives it home for me is none other than, my Queen Esther. And Esther, it's funny because the story of Esther, you would really just look at it and you would really just think that the story of Esther is the story of a beautiful woman being favored. Although it is, it's very much a story of boldness. And as I said before, that at the root of anxiety is fear. The only way to deal with fear is boldness. The opposite of fear is boldness, is courage, right? And so what I've taken from Esther is her boldness to face a situation, knowing that if she dies, she dies. And it sounds so morbid, but with these things, that's something that you have to really be willing to lose it all in order to gain what you want. You have to really be willing to lose it all in order to move forward. You have to be willing to lose it all, in order to break free of that analysis paralysis. She said, if I perish, I perish. She was in a situation where she knew that, okay, if I go to the king, where I know that this is against the law, that you can't just walk into the king's court. You have to be called there. They have to, send requests for you. But she knew that this situation is too dire for me to sit in analysis paralysis. I can't be sitting, okay, how do I approach the king? Do I wait a week? Do I wait 2 months? Maybe we'll do prayer and fasting for a month and then we'll send him a letter and maybe he'll reach. Like there was no time for that. There was no time for that. The situation was too dire where there were people's lives on the line. And maybe it's because we don't see the effect of what staying stuck in anxiety will actually do. Maybe because we don't see the other side of the people that are relying on us. Maybe it's because we don't see the other side of us actually coming out in glory, that we let anxiety paralyze us. I feel like if we were able to see those sides, if we were able to see what God sees on the other side, then maybe we would not be as paralyzed. But unfortunately, that's not always a guarantee. And so we need to walk in boldness. So we need to walk courageously like Esther, saying, if I perish, I perish. Honestly, a lot of the times, if I really, really, really need to move forward and there's something that is just not letting me, that's just on my mind, I will sit there and I will think of the worst possible situation, something like, let's say, God forbid, money was short and I can't afford rent for next month. I'll sit there and be like, okay, well, this is for me to build faith and to be able to move forward. Obviously, like, I'm taking, steps to sort out the situation. But at the end of the day, I can't sit in my house thinking, oh my gosh, no money. What am I going to do? So just an example. But if there's no money for rent for next month, I will genuinely think of the worst case scenario. What is the worst case scenario? I have nowhere to go. They evict me. And, God forbid, we're at, Hope Mission on somebody's couch, something, whatever. I'll think of the worst case scenario just so that I can reconcile and just, be okay. If this is the worst case, I know that my God will not let it get that far. I know that, given many factors, that the situation will not get that far. But if I can be okay with that worst case, if I perish, I perish. If I can be okay with that, then whatever happens, which will fall in between, I can deal with. And so I can move forward with my life, or I can make a decision to move forward. I'm not stuck in this, what's going to happen. And so what I've just learned is that we really, really, really need to be bold. We really need to walk in boldness. We really need to take the authority that we have, because, as the scripture says, God did not give us a spirit of fear. We don't have the spirit of fear built in us. God did not give us a spirit of fear. He did not give us a spirit of fear. He did not give us a spirit of fear. And so when we are courageous enough to step out and to go against that anxiety and that fear that we're experiencing, that's when we'll really be able to have dominion. That's when we'll really be able to have authority. That's when we'll really be able to be free, because you can't be free if you're not bold. You can't be free if you're not bold. There's always going to be a reason to be stressed or to be anxious, no matter what, even if it's not at a clinical level, there's always going to be a reason. And, on the clinical side, you can say that there are other factors to dealing with that, but there's always going to be a reason to be anxious, but there should be more of a reason to be bold. And that's what I really wanted to push forward with this episode. I know it was kind of a lot on different ends, but I hope that you're really able to grasp that at the end of the day, we can bring anything to God, and He will exchange our ashes for beauty, and that He has given us the spirit of love, of power, and He has given us soundness of mind. So we should walk in that boldly. We should walk in that knowing every day that when you're facing anxiety, when you're facing fear, when you're facing confusion, He has not given you that. He has not given you that. He's given you a sound mind. A sound mind means you're not obstructed. A sound mind means you have power in your mind. A sound mind means you are not overwhelmed in your mind every day.